And hello to all of you wonderful and beautiful people. I'm so glad that you are here. As you can see by the title, right? As you can see by the title, we're going to just pick up where we left off last week with reading Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. Alrighty. Like I said, I was at the thrift store always, and I'm at the book station always. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I've been talking about surviving to thriving for almost just about 10 years now. So it's great and gratitude and grace and blessings that this book has stood out. Okay. The whole part of me reading from this entire book, because we're on chapter one, is to bring awareness, self development to all, not only for myself, but for the majority of the world, right? We know that PTSD is a form of diagnosis, but many are not aware of the CPTSD, okay, that is highly influential, um, that a lot of people are being subjected to, okay, afflicted by, and a lot of times it's from lack of awareness of what's going on. I really feel like in society they push certain frames of mental health and not other frames of mental health that are so much more inflicted by more individuals. So complex PTSD, I feel like a lot more people are afflicted by this particular um, quote unquote disease, right? Because it's a conglomerate of um, unorganized imbalance within the person and around the person. Okay. The reason why I keep coming back and talking about this, and we'll continue, is because by with my very nature of understanding awareness of myself, by doing research and data long ago, the numbers still stand out to me that 1 in 3 girls will be sexually, um, before 18, will be set SA before 18, and then it's 1 in 5 boys that will be SA'd before they turn 18. And I think this work is important to me because I know a lot of boys and girls. And if 1 in 3 girls will be SA'd before 18, and 1 in 5 boys will be SA'd before 18, and this has not changed in the last 10 years. This has not changed. Those numbers have not gotten wider. It has strictly stayed the same. This is why this work is important for me, to bring forth awareness. So before we get into the book, we're just highlighting how speaking and talking and using your voice is the first sign of awareness. So let's get into it. Uh, um, but we are only focused on ourselves. We're not focused on what other people's thoughts and opinions are, right? This is a complete self development for the collective. Like I said, 1 in 3 women and girls will be essayed before they're 18, and 1 in 5 boys will be SA'd before they're 18. So this is important work for me. So we were like on here for about 2 hours last week, just giving us, everybody the background of the definitions of complex PTSD, and we went over the examples of emotional flashbacks, and we talked about the ideation of not wanting to be here. Okay, we talked about what you may have been misdiagnosed with, and I'm a certified holistic health practitioner. Okay, um, I studied underneath a natural path back in the day, and my field in as a holistic health practitioner is health and wellness. And for me, health and wellness is speaking into existence, talking to the body, recalibrating the emotions, releasing fear, releasing anxiety, and formulations of awareness. Awareness comes in so many formalities for me: reading, writing, numbers, words of power. There's many ways that your body will become aware and alert. And that is my jam. Whole health in the sector of health and wellness. Okay. The sector of awareness, talking and speaking to the body. But we're going to finish up this chapter, everybody. We are still in chapter 1. We got like maybe 2, 3 more pages to go. Don't forget to like the stream. Come on in, come on in. Check out all of my resources and my freebie on my website, realityimbalance.com. So let's just get right into it. So we left off talking a little bit about origins of CPTSD. So let's start there. Feel free to type your questions in the chat, chime in the chat, and let me know that you're here. All right, origins of CPTSD. How do traumatically abused and or abandoned children develop CPTSD? Chronic post traumatic stress disease. While the origin CPTSD is most often associated with extended periods of physical and or sexual abuse in childhood. My observations convince me that ongoing verbal and emotional abuse also causes it. This is very cute, and I'm thinking, knowing by observing and experiencing that a lot of families, right, family and friends were quick to shoo off, right? Quick to say that you're not being abused or no one has done anything to you when they for years emotionally abused you, right? And they verbally abuse you. Like an example of emotional abuse would be that when you are a child and your guardian, parent, relative, right, those who are watching over you, very consciously made it aware that um, you were less than. Okay, there's many ways that the guardians and your parents can show you how that you are less than, right? One example I would like to use from my earlyhood childhood was that our guardian would make us feel less than by speaking into existence that we were nothing like, you know, them that was taking care of us. We were like the other side of the family. It was never a day or a time when my family or friend will address us and then our guardian would be like, oh, but they're nothing like me. They're just like that other side of the family. They're nasty like that other side of the family. They're nothing like me. They're, like one form of emotional abuse by letting their children know that they don't fit in the guise of their house and that they don't belong. So, emotionally charged. Of course, we know what verbal abuse is, right? Being cursed out. When you curse out your children, when you speak badly or negative to your children, is we know that the person is really speaking to them, to themselves. Um, One example I have that's very clear, like because my guardian ran into one of our neighbors that used to live next door to us, and um, when my guardian left, someone went back and told them that, yeah, she was so mean. She used to cuss their kids out. We used to hear them all the time. She's so mean. She's so nasty and evil. And then my guardian was upset by, I can't believe they said that about me. They're supposed to be good people and Christians. And my guardian just is not aware of the emotional and the verbal abuse it spread, not only to her children, but everyone in the neighborhood could hear and knew how she felt about us with curses. So let's get back into it. So those are two examples, one emotional, the other one verbal. Many dysfunctional parents react contemptuously to a baby or toddler's plaintive call for connection and attachment. Contempt is extremely traumatizing to a child and, at best, extremely noxious to an adult. So, we talked about contempt before when a child is wanting attention of some kind, and the parent or guardian are just like disengaged completely, like, oh, I have to do this for you again, or oh, I have to take care of you again, or hurry up and do it, so the parent can get back to whatever they were doing. So he goes on to say, the author, contempt is a toxic cocktail of verbal and emotional abuse, a deadly de- degeneration, rage, and disgust. Rage creates fear, and disgust creates shame in a child in a way that soon teaches her to refrain from crying out, from ever asking for attention. Very key, very highlight. Once again, rage creates fear, and disgust creates shame in the child in a way that soon teaches her to refrain from crying out, from ever asking for attention. So, like, our guardian yelled at us every day, night and day for so long, we didn't even feel comfortable asking for basic shit. We're in a car ride. We would never speak up and say we have to use the bathroom, or we were thirsty, we were hungry, or not, because, um, you know, our what we had wanted and needed was always on the back burner, but our guardian's emotions was always in the front, right? We had to consider their guardian as being rage and emotionally charged. So we didn't ask for water. We didn't ask to go to the bathroom. Simple, basic things that parents aren't aware of, how children will conceptualize rage and anger, that they will not even go to their guardian, their parent, or their teacher, their friends for basic things. They will keep it to themselves. Moving on. Um, Before long, the child gives up on seeking any kind of help or connection at all. The child's bid for bonding and acceptance is thwarted, and she is left to suffer in the frightened despair of abandonment. Particularly, abusive parents deepen the abandonment trauma by linking corporal punishment with contempt. Slaveholders typically use contempt and scorn to destroy their victims' self esteem. Slaves and children who are made to feel worthless and powerless devolve into learning helplessness and can be controlled with far less energy and attention. Okay? Cult leaders also use contempt to shrink their followers into absolute submission after luring them in with brief phases of fake, unconditional love. Furthermore, CPTSD can also be caused by emotional neglect alone. This key theme is explored at length in Chapter 5. If you notice that you are berating yourself because your trauma seems insignificant compared to others, please skip ahead to this chapter. Emotional neglect also typically underlies most traumatizations that are more glaringly evident. Let's highlight that. Emotional neglect also typically underlies most traumatizations that are more glaringly evident. Parents who routinely ignore or turn their back on a child's call for attention, connection, or help abandon their child to unmanageable amounts of fear, and the child eventually gives up and succumbs to depressed, death like feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. All right, now that's pretty self explanatory there, right? Parents who routinely ignore and turn their backs on their child's call for attention. Say, for instance, your parent is going to work and you're dropping them off at daycare, or you're dropping off at this person's house, and your child is like, no, I don't want to go there. No, I don't want to go there. No, I don't want to go there. Yet you're focused, the parent, the guardian, like, well, I have to go to work. So you don't have no choice. But yet you're missing the bigger picture of why the child does not want to go there. Usually, if a child is having a good old time, if they're feeling comfortable and safe, okay, in their environment, they wouldn't really truly have an issue going a place, right? But if a child is trying to get your attention in a way by letting you know that I don't want to go over here and I can't go over here, continuously, that I don't want to go over here, and like, no, I don't want to go over there. A lot of children cannot really conceptualize on how to tell you why and how they're being abused because they're being watched by other guardians. So they're not going to be straightforward unless you have, you wouldn't be here, right? Um, it's very interesting. There's not many children who'll be straightforward, like, I'm being abused over here, okay? They can't really quite conceptualize that. There are some children that are exceptions that I do know that will stand up, that will talk, and that is because of the relationship they already have with their parents. Okay, this is already coming from a broken sense. All right, so then the attention is removed and the child feel helpless, and early on in their life they will have this ideation of not wanting to be here very early in life, in elementary school even. In elementary school even, there are children who are having not wanting to be here ideations because of this emotional neglect. Furthermore, the author goes to say that these types of rejections simultaneously magnify the child's fear and eventually add a coating of shame to it. Over time, this fear and shame begets a toxic inner critic that holds the child and later the adult totally responsible for his parents' abandonment until he becomes his own worst enemy and descends into the bowels of CPTSD. Over time, this fear and shame begets a toxic inner critic that holds the child and later the adult totally responsible for his parents' abandonment until he becomes his own worst enemy and descends into the bowels of CPTSD. So now we have a paragraph here talking about, was titled More About Trauma. Trauma occurs when attack or abandonment triggers a fight flight response so intensely that the person cannot turn it off once the threat is over. He becomes stuck in a adrenalized state. His sympathetic nervous system is locked on and he cannot toggle into the relaxation function of the parasympathetic nervous system. One common instance of this occurrence when a child is attacked and hurt by a bully after school. He may remain in a hyper vigilant, fearful state until someone takes action to ensure him that he will not be re victimized, and until someone helps him release the hyperactivation in his nervous system. Mm-mm-mm. If the child has learned through experience that he can come to at least one of his parents when he is hurting, frightened, or needing help, he will tell mom or dad about it. With them, he will grieve the temporary death of his sense of safety in the world by verbally ventilating, crying, and angering about it. Moreover, his parents will report the bully and take steps to assure that it will not happen again, and the child will typically be released from the trauma. He will naturally relax back into the safety of the parasympathetic nervous system functioning. Simple. One incident traumas can often be resolved relatively easily if CPTSD is not already present. If, however, the bullying happens on a numerous occasions and the child does not seek help, or if the child lives in an environment so dangerous that the parent is powerless to ensure a modicum of safety, it may take more than parental comforting to release the trauma. If the trauma is not too continuous over too long a time, a short course of therapy may be all that is needed to resolve the trauma, provided, of course, the danger in the environment can effectively be um, remediated. I'm going to put a pause there. So when I think about this, I just think about, so many kids who are in foster care and adopted homes that are not safe over and over and over again, and where there's no intervention. Who's 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 counseling adopted children, foster children? Where's their counseling? That's up to the guardian and that's up to the parent. It's not up to the system. It was just like a reminder somewhere for someone that these children, these forgotten children, will be introduced to trauma over and over and over again with no nation, and will 100% have children themselves, and the same cycle will continue. Moving on, so the author is saying that when the trauma, however, is repetitive and ongoing and no help is available, the child may become so frozen in trauma that the symptoms of simple PTSD begin to set in. This can also occur during the prolonged trauma of combat or entrapment in a cult or domestic violence situation. If, however, a person is also afflicted by ongoing family abuse or profound emotional abandonment, the trauma will manifest as a particularly severe emotional flashback because he already has CPTSD. This is particularly true when when his parents is also a bully. Okay, so there's many layers here. Um, they were talking about more about trauma and the origins of CPTSD. There are so many layers because there's a lot of factions that are affecting your nervous system. That fight or flight that's always occurring within you where you can't relax. You cannot relax. All right, so let's get into the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. All right. So this is why that nervous system continues to be overactive. This is why we lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, smoke, don't smoke, 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 smoke. Be in places and environments that you're not supposed to be in because it's a whole reenactment. Um, okay. Because I think truly over time it becomes a pattern where you're building up barriers for your own safety, but it's a pattern of trauma. But you're building up safety with barriers. So the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawn is FAWN. Earlier, I mentioned the fight flight response that is an innate automatic response to danger in all human beings. A more complete and accurate description of this instinct is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. The complex nervous system wiring of this response allows a person in danger to react in 4 different ways. A fight response is triggered when a person suddenly responds aggressively to something threatening. For me, it used to be people used, even till to this day, I have to take a minute back when someone is trying to give me instructions on something, you know, I automatically have this fight response that I already know this. You don't need to tell me. And 100%, I do already know. I do know it. But it's the fight, the aggressiveness that comes out automatically. The author is saying that a flight response is triggered when a person responds to a perceived threat by fleeing or symbolically by launching into hyperactivity. Hyperactivity. Let's read that again. A flight response is triggered when a person responds to a perceived threat by fleeing or symbolically by launching into hyperactivity. I know there's a lot of hyperactivity going on. So many things that just came to mind too, like I continue to induce it by with foods also. So the author goes on to say a freeze response is triggered when a person realizing resistance is futile gives up, numbs out into disassociation, and or collapses as if accepting the inevitability of being hurt. I think the freeze response in our family was always getting high. So let's read that again. A freeze response is triggered when a person realizing resistance is futile gives up, numbs out into disassociation, and or collapses as if accepting the inevitability of being hurt. And the final F is fawn. A fawn response is triggered when a person responds to threat by trying to be pleasing or helpful in order to appease and foretell an attacker. Ain't that something? This fourfold response potential will hitherto for be referred to as the 4Fs. Now, the fun I wasn't really quite aware of, but I know exactly what it is now. And that's so interesting. It's so interesting. Yeah. Giving people leadway, not really telling them the feelings, how you really felt about the situation, but gently telling them about the situation, but then saying, oh, but I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. So letting the person off basically by patting the person on the head is fawning. It says a fawn response is triggered when a person responds to threat by trying to be pleasing or helpful in order to appease and foretell an attacker. All right, he's going on to say that traumatized children often over gravitate to one of these response patterns to survive. And as time passes, these four modes become elaborated into entrenched defensive structures that are similar to narcissistic, and they have narcissistic in brackets fight, obsessive compulsive in brackets of flight, disassociative in a bracket of freeze, or codependent defenses in the bracket of fawn. So hope you guys are writing this down and taking notes, because this is truly for the self-awareness of self and the self-awareness of the collective of all. So let's go back a little. He says that traumatized children over gravitate to one of these response patterns to survive. And as time passes, these four modes become elaborated into entrenched defensive structures that are similar to narcissists, which is obsessive compulsives, which is flight, disassociative, which is freeze, or codependent defenses, which is fawn. So those are the patterns that children gravitate in order to survive. I have to say, we hit it all on the nail. Um, Narcissists with fight, okay, with, can't be told what to do, no matter what it is. It's always your response, but your response is always fight. Okay, the obsessive compulsive, right? Things always have to be a certain way, things always have to match up, things always have to be perfect. That's a form of flight. Disassociative, which is freeze, which is predominant. Okay, and this is probably why so many people smoke weed, is to disassociate themselves. Or the fawn defense, which is codependency, where you feel like you still need that guardian, you still need that parent, some kind of way, some kind of enforcement, some kind of cult, some kind of religion, some kind of rule, saying that you still have to honor thy mother and thy father, although they abused you. That's fawn defense. He says that these structures help children survive their horrific childhoods, but leave them very limited and narrow in how they respond to life. Even worse, they remain locked in these patterns in adulthood when they no longer need to rely so heavily on one primary response pattern. Okay? Fight, narcissist, flight, compulsiveness, freeze, disassociative, and fawn, which is codependent defensive behaviors. It is important to understand that variances in the childhood abuse, neglect patterns, birth order, and genetic predispositions result in people polarizing to their particular 4F type. This is true because I'm thinking for myself, one stands out. Well, all of them do really, but the one that I see in myself through my family shown through self improvement was definitely the dissociative issue and the flight as well with compulsive behavior. Um, in the next section, we will explore examples of how children are driven into these defenses by traumatizing parents. The four children in the vignette below match the four basic types of trauma survivors. And it has here that Bob is equal to fight, which is a narcissist. Carol is equal to flight, which is obsessive. Maud is equal to freeze. These are names of people he's going to give examples of, okay? Maud equals freeze, disassociative. Sean equals to fawn, codependent. The four F's in a CPTSD inducing family. This is important, you guys. Important, because a lot of us just aren't aware of the abuse and the trauma that we're passing on to our family and our children. Just not aware. Okay, so now they're going to talk about Carol. So, Carol, remember, is the flight obsessive compulsive. So, here's an example. Carol was the scapegoat in her family. Narcissistic and borderline parents typically choose at least one child to be the designated family scapegoat. The author says narcissistic and borderline parents typically choose at least one child to be the designated family scapegoat. Scapegoating is the process by which a bully offloads and externalizes his pain, stress, and frustration by attacking a less powerful person. Typically, scapegoating brings the bully some momentary relief. It does it does not, however, effectively metabolize or release his pain, and scapegoating soon resumes as the bully's internal discomfort resurfaces. Pause. I find it interesting. They said that big families usually find, wow. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting thoughts, different levels. Okay. Because sometimes it don't even have to be the one, but usually it is because it's always easier to single out that one person. But for us, it was both of us in our home. It was both of us, okay, who took the blunt end of all. I like that this author is saying this because typically scapegoating brings the bully some momentary relief. It does not, however, effectively metabolize or release his pain, and scapegoating soon resumes as the bully's internal discomfort resurface. He's going to talk about an author. I've heard of this author before. William Rich, Reich, in his brilliant book, The Psychology of Fascism, explains how scapegoating occurs on a continuum that stretches from the persecution of the targeted child by a bullying parent to the horrific scapegoating of the Jews by the Nazis. Now, you know, back in the day, we was reading about Adolf Hitler and his childhood, okay? If y'all was here, y'all know. In especially dysfunctional families like Carol's, the scapegoating parent often organizes the rest of the family to also gang up on the scapegoat. Hmm. Yep. If there was one person in our house that was more of the scapegoat, of course it was me. Because, the boys will be boys. The boys have to go out and play. They can't keep a boy in the house. He gonna be gay. That's what they used to say. We have to let them go outside. We have to let them roam or they're gonna be gay. Boys gonna be boys. Yet we sit here and getting abused because of my hair, because of my um, body weight, body type. And then when my brothers heard that, they all internalized that as well. And guess what? They dated someone and wanted to be around people who was opposite. So the author is saying that Carol discovered a great deal about her early childhood from watching home videos. Her parents were so narcissistically oblivious that they unabashedly recorded many incidents of Carol being verbally and emotionally abused by them. In the background of recordings of the performances of their child, her older brother. Severely narcissistic parents are rarely embarrassed by their aggressive behavior. They feel entitled to punish a child for anything that displeases them, no matter how unreasonable it might appear to an impartial observer. Exactly. Carol in on her early by disdainfully blaming her for soiling her diaper before she was even one. By the time she was 3, she had been so frequently punished for making noise while talking and playfully exploring her house that her constant state of fear generated an ADHD like condition in her. Let's read that again. By the time she was 3 years old, she had been so frequently punished for making noise while talking and playfully exploring her house that her constant state of fear generated an ADHD like condition in her. Now, there are some family and friends, relatives, homes I go to, and their kids are running around screaming crazy. And I remember I used to be like, we were never allowed to do that, ever. We had to sit down and shut and be quiet always inside the house. If y'all want to go and scream outside, go do that outside. Don't do that in here. Right? And that may seem reasonable, right? But how can you explore outside if you can't really definitely explore within your home, figuratively and literally? How can you explore outside and you can't even explore within the own means of your own homes? And believe me, some of those kids were loud, and I'm like, okay, yeah, they need to sit down. Okay, maybe they need to have some more organization. But the whole thing is, they were allowed to be children within their home. They were made to feel safe within their homes. That's because that's their homes too, right? The author goes on to say that Carol's large background was her refuge where she would play. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that wrong. Carol's large backyard was her refuge where she would play with great gusto, climbing, running, cavorting, and building and ransacking villages that she made with her toys and leaves, grass, sticks, and stones. She would busy herself from breakfast until supper, often forgetting to come in for lunch, which she thought, in retrospect, made life easier for her mother, Fax, who never called her in to eat. That's crazy. One family video from this time was the straw that broke the camel's back of Carol's denial that her family was abusive. Y'all put a pin in that. That's why we're always talking about using your voice no matter what. Using your voice no matter what. You're not looking for validation. You're using your voice no matter what, because that's when the divine spirit walks on in. You just have to activate it. And the author was like, one family video from this time was the straw that broke the camel's back of Carol's denial that her family was abusive. It showed her playing a game whereby she would repetitively smack herself hard on the hand and call herself a bad girl as she wobbled around the living room touching various knickknacks. Damn. There was a considerable amount of footage that showed her parents and siblings roaring with mocking the light in the background. Mm. When contempt replaces the milk of human kindness at an early age, the child feels humiliated and overwhelmed. Too helpless to protect or even understand the unfairness of being abused, the child eventually becomes convinced that she is defective and fatally flawed. Frequently, she comes to believe that she deserves her parents' persecution. When Carol was 4, she accidentally fell out of a second story window. They put quote unquote accidentally. Okay. Fell out of a second story window. A few years later, she stepped out into the streets in front of a car and was knocked to the ground. As an adult, she was convinced that both injuries contributed to her extremely painful early onset scoliosis. She also believed that she was in so much pain that she was unconsciously trying to end her life. Ah, Shay. That's exactly what she was doing. Fortunately for Carol, school eventually offered a glimmer of reprieve. Hmm. A kindly third grade teacher perceived her intelligence and praised her enough that she soon became an excellent student. Unfortunately, the terrible anxiety that she lived with 24/7 soon morphed into an obsessive compulsive approach to schoolwork. This, in turn, later manifested into a life spoiling perfectionism and workaholism. Carol's older brother, Bob, the favorite and hero of her parents, was not molded with fear and rejection like Carol. Bob, the recipient of the parents' narcissistic expectations, was shaped into a multidimensional achiever by their withdrawal of approval for less than perfect performances. He was then given tidbits of praise for outstanding accomplishments that would reflect positively on his parents. He also enlisted to further scapegoat Carol and, as time went on, outdid his parents in tormenting her. Crazy work, right? Crazy work. Moving on, the author is saying, I believe there is an epidemic of siblings abuse that afflicts many dysfunctional families. Now, that's the part I really can't speak on, but I can definitely relate to. I think there was only like a small glimmer of that within my brother, but we both pretty much got the butt in. I was just a girl. I was allowed to do less. He was allowed to explore a whole lot more, like 100% more. Okay, while I was made to be isolated. So, but my brother slightly took on like this functional behavior, right, of scapegoating, but it wasn't for long. So, what is he saying? Siblings in such families can traumatize the victim scapegoat as severely as the parents. In families with checked out disinter- disinterested parents, they can, in fact, be the child's source of trauma. Facts. This is especially true in our culture where Emotional neglect of children is rampant, and where parents are um, routinely advised to let the kids work it out themselves. But how does a child who has half the strength of his older sibling work it out and stop him from tormenting her without the aid of a stronger ally? Bob himself did not escape the pathological influence of his parents. Scapegoating became a habit for him, and he developed the narcissistic sixth sense for identifying others whose families had victimized and used them as targets. Now that's crazy work. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? This skill, this experience is supposed to form into a talent to help people. I think what they're going to say is he abused that. Let's read that again. Bob himself did not escape the pathological influence of his parents. Scapegoating became a habit for him, and he developed the narcissistic sixth sense for identifying others whose families had victimized and used them as targets. Bob, hurting from his parents, used him and holding him to perfectionistic standards, grew up to become a full fledged narcissistic and control freak. He aggressively tried to mold his loved ones as he had been molded and was working on whipping his fourth wife into shape at the time of Carol's therapy. Ain't that something? Let us return to Carol. And you guys, we got about a page and a half left this chapter. The author says, let us return to Carol. As an adolescent, her trauma was painfully reinforced by her surrounding community, who so admired her brother's accomplishments that they joined the family and pathologist. What? As an adolescent, her trauma was painfully reinforced by her surrounding community, who so admired her brother's accomplishments that they joined the family's pathologicalizing Carol as a bad seed. Unfortunately, things deteriorated further for Carol as an adult, even though she had seemingly escaped from the family. Listen up. Carol remained symbolically enthralled to the family by getting ensnared with narcissistic people who were just as abusive and neglectful as her parents. This well known psychological phenomenon is called repetition compulsion or reenactment, and trauma survivors are extremely susceptible to it. Facts. We will explore this extensively throughout the book. I got to read that again because I love it. I love just the whole awareness of it. I love it. This well known psychological phenomenon is called repetition compulsive. Hold on. Or reenactment, and trauma survivors are extremely susceptible to it. We will explore this extensively throughout the book. So now he's going to talk about the third child example, Maud. Remember, Maud was the freeze of the four F's, which was disassociative. A third child, Maud, was born 2 years after Carol. By this time, her parents were worn out from incessantly molding Bob and Carol. Having whipped Bob and Carol into hero and scapegoat shape, they had little use for Maud. They did not have enough energy or interest left to whip her into anything. Maud became the classic lost child and was left on her own to raise herself. She soon discovered food and daydreaming as her sole source of comfort. However, because Bob also enjoyed using her for target practice, she stayed in her room as much as possible. In retrospect, Carol also thought that Bob was molesting Maud. That's why when I was just reading right there, that instant came into why she was in her room with her door closed. That already flashed across my mind. Okay, she hypothesized. Wait, yeah, she hypothesized that these two factors contributed to the fact that Maud could not tolerate the various nurseries and preschools in which her mother tried to dump her. Over time, Maud numbed out into a low grade dissociative depression and felt extremely anxious and avoidant whenever she was in social situations. This is so key with sexual abuse. At 4, an eccentric aunt gave Maud a television for her room, and she was sealed up and attached to an order in which wanted TV rather than with is still lost in that relationship, living on disability in her apartment cluttered with an enormous amount of useless hoarded material. Cray. And the whole thing is that parents don't even see this. How, because they are still dealing with their own blind issues that they can't even see the issues that are right in front of them. Right in front of them. Sometimes it's just like so bizarre to me. So bizarre. Moving on to this final little chapter piece of chapter 1 of Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. Okay, by Pete Walker. This one last little piece here is titled Poor Parenting Creates Pathological Sibling Rivalry. Poor parenting creates pathological sibling rivalry. And before we even get into this paragraph, this comes out the most when the parent and guardian pass away. When the sibling rivalry really amps up. Okay. But nevertheless, the author is saying that PTSD engendering families, Maud not turn to her siblings for comfort because her parents unconsciously practiced the divide and conquer principle. Her parents molded and encouraged sarcasm and constant fault finding among the children. Moreover, interactions of cooperation or warmth were routinely ridiculed. Sibling rivalry is further reinforced in dysfunctional families by the fact that all the children are subsisting on minimum nurturance and are therefore without resource to give to each other. Mm. Moreover, competition for the little their parents have to give creates even fiercer rivalries. 2 years later, Sean was born. At first, it seems as if he was destined from the same loss, disassociative destiny as Maud, but as he matured, he fell into the role of gifted child, as described by Alice Miller in The Dream of the Gifted Child. Sorry, yes, because I got that book. Yay! I'm so glad that everything is just connecting and synchronicity. Gratitude. Thank you. I'll shake. But as he matured, he fell into the role of the gifted child, as described by Alice Miller in the drama of The Gifted Child. We was reading Alice Miller when she was really talking about Hitler. But anyway, Sean's inborn gift coming into this life was his compassion and his sense that if he studied his mother enough and figured out what she needed, he could provide for her needs. This would sometimes calm her down and make her less dangerous, bitter, and sarcastic. Over the years, Sean honed the skill and could almost clairvoyantly anticipate her sore spots, moods, and preferences. Sometimes it seems he knew what she needed before she did. And with practice, he became adept at diffusing her anger and sometimes even gaining morsels of her approval. Um, Sidebar note, this is smelling like fawn to me. This is smelling like fawn. All right. Synchronistically, his mother realized that she was getting old and that her alcohol ravaged husband would likely precede her. Not wanting to be alone, she exploited his compassionate nature and primed him for domestic service for as long as she would need it. Sean remained living at home until his mother's death released him from emotional captivity at the age of 29. This was the codependent enslavement we will explore more in chapter 7. Baby, I cannot wait to get to that one. Just those words is like, woo, tantalizing. Codependent enslavement? Ciao. Okay. Furthermore, we only got a couple more sentences left, y'all. A friend of Sean's who knew all the siblings as adults marveled that it seems as if each had different parents. Facts. Finally, it is also important to know that the scapegoat role does not fall exclusively on the flight type as it did with Carol. It can be bestowed on any one of the four F types depending on the given family. The scapegoating role can also shift over time from one person to another, and each parent or sibling may choose a different scapegoat. Facts. Chapters 6 and 7 explore each of the four F's and their corresponding defensive structures in greater detail. These chapters will also help you determine your 4F defense and help you address issues that are more specific to your type of CPTSD. Okay, so we're talking about complex post traumatic stress disorder that does not get any limelight on a news channel anywhere you know. So we heard it here first. PTSD is a more form of a stress trauma that is from one occurrence, okay, that has happened. That's why, veterans are talked about it the most because we're at war. It's just that one occurrence, that one environment, okay? And once they come out, they have flashbacks. But with CPTSD, it is like an imbalance within the person from a repetitive over and over and over and over and over and over with no solutions, okay, over and over, that ties into other formalities of disease, right? Many formalities of mental health issues, okay, from CPTSD. All right, stems from an environment, stems from parent or guardian in your environment where you're being abused over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Okay, kind of a big difference. This is why this is important. This is why we have a lot of, people today who are isolating themselves, who are socially awkward, who are disengaged, who disengaged definitely from within themselves, right? And just have so many different access to things out here that is not healthy. All right. So we're going to continue on as I always do. I'm reading like 4 or 5 books right now, y'all. But this is one I'm reading with everyone just to give a full awareness, releasing. The first release is speaking out because we are aware of these things that are going on around us and within us. If 1 in 3 girls will be abused before 18 and 1 in 5 boys will be abused before 18, that's a whole lot of millions of people who have been essayed abused, and this is why this work is continuing. So, the first chapter with Pete Walker, Complex PTSD from Surviving and Thriving, we explore what CPTSD is, you guys. All right. So before we end, the common symptoms of CPTSD are emotional flashbacks, tyrannical inner and outer critic, toxic shame, self abandonment, social anxiety, abject feelings of loneliness and abandonment, fragile self esteem, attachment disorder, developmental arrest, relationship difficulties, radical mood facilitations, disassociation via distracting activities or mental processes. That has been major for me and in my family. Hair triggered fight flight responses. That has been very severe. Oversensitivity to stressful situations. Shay, that has been severe as well. And ideation of not being here anymore. That has been severe as well. As a matter of fact, there has been several people in my family who has actually followed through with that ideation. And then I question, like, well, how did they get there? Oh, I don't know. Oh, yeah, they were weak. Disgusting. I just want to, you know, part of me say I want to give them a hug, and part of me is like I want to punch them because they are just not aware of what's really truly going on, and that is because they are unaware of their own selves. So how could they be aware of someone else's circumstances if they close the eye within them own selves? So that's where the hug comes from, because they have no clue. Those were the symptoms of CPTSD. We gave y'all a definition of what CPTSD is. We know the origins. He talked about the origins, right? The origins is many dysfunctional parents. The definition of complex PTSD is a more severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is delineated from this better-known trauma syndrome by 5 of its most common and troublesome features, which is emotional flashbacks, toxic shame, abandonment, a vicious inner critic. Okay, this is why into the body, and social anxiety. Okay, so complex PTSD is an umbrella, right, of imbalances within. And that's how we are going to conclude this live. When we come back, we're going to be talking about levels of recovery. The one thing I do love about this book is, it gives us an awareness, and then it gives a solution. Then it gives an awareness, and then it gives a solution. It's not this continual re-traumatizing instance, right? Like how they did in college. I was reading all those textbooks and it's like, damn, ain't no solution. But guess what? I was the solution because I was writing the essays for the solution, but reading the material was hard. But this is wonderful because we have fashionable solutions up until today, synchronicity, words that are always been spoken to me. Okay, synchronicity spoken through the divine Ashe. Let you finish out the rest of your Sunday fun day. And make sure, if you enjoy this kind of video and this kind of talks or these kind of readings, thumbs up the video. If you want to know more about resources that I have available or freebies, check out my website, realityimbalance.com. I have my first volume of Affirmations for a Survivor on Amazon underneath my author name, Shawnee Janelle. And all the links will be in the description. I cannot wait to get through all of this and work with each and every individual into the body, speaking into existence, okay? Making a new path for yourself right here and now. Relinquishing all of those old behavior, all those toxic behavior, all of those curses, right? Pressed upon you from your guardians, from your parents, from the system. All of those curses you have the power to break. Take care of yourself and each other. Bye.